The man stood in our front yard with a cheap pistol shaking in his hands, aimed directly at my wife's face. His chest puffed with false authority, his eyes wide as if he was on some righteous mission, and all of this because she had jogged past the HOA clubhouse without carrying identification. What he didn't realize, and oh, how I wish I could have seen his face when the truth hit him, was that the woman he thought he was intimidating had spent the last decade doing the kind of work that makes grown men vanish in silence. Claire had only been home for 2 days after returning from a classified Delta Force mission, her gear still untouched in the closet, and now she was staring down a middle-aged man who looked like he bought his tactical setup from a bargain bin and held his gun sideways like he'd learned from a bad action movie. I knew she could have dismantled him using nothing more than a pine cone and a shoelace, but for once, she actually gave him an out. He didn't take it, and that's when things escalated. We moved here for peace, quiet mornings, gardening, maybe a chicken coop for her, fast internet and a finished basement for my cybersecurity projects. But what we got instead was an HOA with delusions of grandeur, a group that called itself the Home Safety Division like they were running a paramilitary operation. They patrolled in matte black golf carts with block letters on the side and zip-tied blue lights on the roof, like SWAT units with cup holders. At first, I laughed and thought it was a joke, but then I met Karen Brewster, the HOA president, who strutted up on day one with laminated badges and 3 clipboards like she was inspecting troops. She handed us a booklet of absurd rules, including one that read, "Residents must maintain a non-threatening appearance during recreational activities," and when I asked what that meant, she smiled and said, "You'll know it when you see it." Claire stayed calm as always, the same calm she wore defusing bombs in thunderstorms, but 8 days later that calm shattered. She left for her usual morning jog while I made coffee and logged into work, and 10 minutes later my phone buzzed with a security alert. I checked the feed expecting a delivery, but instead saw 2 HSD golf carts blocking the street and Claire standing motionless with her hands slightly raised. In front of her stood a man in knockoff tactical gear pointing a pistol at her chest, yelling about restricted jogging zones. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a neighborhood committee. It was a group of armed cosplayers playing soldier. He tried to sound commanding, voice cracking as he barked orders like, "Hands higher!" But Claire didn't even flinch. She tilted her head, unimpressed, and said in a calm, steady tone, "Sir, under Florida Statute 790.10, brandishing a firearm is a felony. You might want to think carefully about your next move." He blinked, stunned that someone dared to challenge his fantasy authority. "Don't quote laws at me," he snapped. "This is HOA jurisdiction." Claire let out a low laugh and said, "The HOA doesn't outrank the Constitution. Pointing an unregistered weapon at a civilian? That's attempted assault with a deadly weapon." His 2 backup cronies shuffled nervously with their discount batons, clearly wondering if they'd made a mistake. That's when I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and said, "Gentlemen, this is your last chance to walk away before things go sideways." The leader snarled, "Stay out of this. Official HSD enforcement." Claire smirked and whispered, "Official." Then she moved. I've seen her train, I know what she can do, but watching it unfold in our yard was something else entirely. In less than a heartbeat, she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and sent the gun clattering across the pavement. With her other hand, she shoved him into his partner, knocking them both down. The last guy lunged with his baton, and Claire dropped low, swept his legs, and pinned him face down with her knee. Calm. Effortless. Like tying her shoes. The leader whimpered, clutching his wrist and crying, "You broke it!" Claire crouched low, her voice like ice. "No. If I broke it, you wouldn't be holding it." That was a warning. By then, neighbors were at their windows with phones out, and someone whispered, "Is that Karen's crew?" Sure enough, Karen came marching over, visor blazing, clipboard in hand, shrieking, "Arrest her! She assaulted my officers." Claire stood, brushed herself off, and looked Karen dead in the eye. "Your officers," she said. "Lady, they're about to be defendants." And then came the sirens. 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up, lights flashing, scattering the crowd. Deputies stepped out, eyes landing on the ridiculous scene. 3 grown men in mismatched gear on the ground, one whining about his wrist, another face down under Claire's knee. "Drop the weapons," one deputy ordered. "Already did," I said, nodding toward the pistol. Karen ran forward, waving her clipboard like a badge. "Officers! Arrest that woman!" The deputy frowned. "Ma'am, These men are impersonating law enforcement. You know that's a felony, right? One of the thugs broke instantly, babbling, "It wasn't my idea. Karen paid us. She said it was legal." Karen's face drained of color as deputies cuffed all three men, and her, reading off charges like a grocery list: impersonating an officer, brandishing a firearm, conspiracy, attempted assault. The neighborhood erupted in whispers and cheers. I crossed my arms and said, "Should have stuck to passive-aggressive emails, Karen." Claire handed me my coffee like nothing had happened and said, "Told you it wouldn't take long." Watching Karen shoved into a cruiser was sweet, but the fallout was even better. Within a week, Karen was out as HOA president, facing felony charges, lawsuits, and a ruined reputation. Her wannabe enforcers were denied bail and looking at years behind bars. And the HOA? No one wanted a leadership role ever again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I leaned back and asked Claire, "Think they'll try this again?" She sipped her tea and smirked. "If they're stupid enough, I'll be ready." That was the day the HOA learned the hardest lesson of all: they picked the wrong family.